Hey, welcome to Brown Bag History today, June 12th, 2024. We're celebrating 100 years of everybody's favorite bridge, the Big Eddy Bridge. And as we start, we acknowledge that the land around Revelstoke and on the Columbia River and its tributaries is the Snipes' homeland and traditional territory. We acknowledge the ties of the Secwepemc, the Okanagan Nation Alliance, the Ktunaxa to this land. We acknowledge our use and inhabitation of this land sacred to these four nations. We respectfully honor their traditions and culture. So this is the first bridge across the Columbia River at Revelstoke. This was a toll bridge built by a man named Gustavus Blinn Wright, who was kind of a legendary road builder in British Columbia. He built the tote road for during the railway construction days between Sicamous and Revelstoke. Would have been then Eagle Pass Landing was what is now Sicamous, and Farwell, or second crossing, what is now Revelstoke. And that was a very rough, quickly built toll bridge. You can see the little toll station there. So in order to get from the West Bank to the east or back again, you had to pay a toll to get across Wright's Bridge. It didn't last very long. It was gone probably within a short period of time. Once the once the railway bridge was built, it was no longer in service. The after that, really the only way across was by boat, or sometimes when the river was frozen over, because it did freeze over in the winter, people could cross the river on the ice, or they'd walk across the railway bridge, which wasn't a safe or easy thing to do. And we have a story by a woman named Alice Griffiths, and this is Alice in the back of the photo here, and her husband, Tom Griffiths, in front. And they came over from England in 1906, and then the next year they settled in the Big Eddy, acquired some homestead there, built what became quite a big farm in the Big Eddy area. But they'd come from England, and Alice had been brought up in a very sort of proper household. There was music around all the time. They always had a piano in the house, and they came here and over in the Big Eddy, there was really nothing over there. But sometimes they'd have concerts in the park, what's now Queen Elizabeth Park, and she could actually hear the music wafting across the water. And one day she said to her husband, "We have to go over." And at that time, they just had two small children, Esther, their oldest daughter, and Jeffrey, who was just a baby at the time. So they decided to walk across the bridge with the two children. And she said it was quite scary. And you could see the water underneath. There were no handrails. And they got across, and she got to the concert, which she loved, but she was worried the whole time about how they would get back across the bridge. So it kind of ruined the whole experience for her. We actually have an interview with her, and she said, "I was loving the band, but I thought, how can I get over that bridge? If I get over, I'll never come back." We were walking over the bridge, my husband and myself, and the manager of the sawmill came behind. He said, "I see you're a little scared. Take hold of your husband's arm and I'll carry the baby." So he did. He helped us. And we went over, and I was saying all the way, I don't care if it's 1 year, if it's 2 years, I'm waiting for the traffic bridge. So I went over and I waited a year before I came back to town. So, that's how isolated it was and how much they needed a bridge. But the first bridge was not the bridge we all know now. It was a wooden bridge. And here's a fire insurance map from 1905 showing the locations of the bridges. So there's at the far end, there's the CPR bridge. And our current Big Eddy Bridge comes across onto Wilson Street. The 1885 toll bridge came onto Wright Street. This is named after G.B. Wright, the road builder. And the 1910 wooden bridge was built in that same location. So in 1909, they were able to get enough funding to build the bridge. So this is a photograph of it under construction in 1909. This photograph was actually taken by uh, uh, Jessie Rutherford, who was Ruby Knobb's mother. She took several photographs around town, and this one actually shows the construction of the wooden bridge in 1909. It was officially opened at midnight on April 26, 1910. There was an article in the newspaper that said W. Gillette, head of the firm of Gillette and McDonald, contractor for the bridge, invited a number of friends to an informal banquet at the Central Hotel to celebrate the formal opening and christening of the bridge. And they actually decided to call it Victoria Bridge. I don't think that name ever really stuck, but that's when they christened it, that's what they christened it. And the newspaper went on to say, an adjournment was then made to the bridge when Mayor Hamilton, that was Dr. J.H. Hamilton, was mayor at the time, briefly testified to the value of the work to Revelstoke. He did not know if midnight was the usual time for christening a bridge, but anyhow, it was a delightful precedent and a unique occasion. After congratulating the government and the contractor on the work and saying that it would result in a great measure in the development for Revelstoke, the mayor declared the bridge open. Miss Byrne of the Central Hotel struck the bridge smartly with a bottle of champagne, and it was called Victoria Bridge. And as the sparkling liquid gushed out over the woodwork, and the mayor, incidentally, the gathering present gave vent to hearty cheers. The scene was very striking, and the moon coming out at that moment reflected in the bubbling liquid as it bathed the bridge, sending sparkling gems on all sides. Such a ceremony is unique, and the darkness made it doubly impressive. And then after they christened the bridge, after midnight, they returned back to the hotel for a sumptuous dinner. And there were several speeches as well. And one of the things they noted was that the work was completed accident-free, which is actually quite something. So I just have a few photographs here of the 1910 bridge that we'll have a look at first. It's a photograph from the West Bank looking over towards, this is Front Street. You can see here in some of the big hotels. That's probably Victoria House Hotel and the Central Hotel at that end. And this is a photograph of a group of people on the bridge in around 1919 or 1920. This man is Jack McCarty, and we'll be talking about him in a bit. Shella Dickey, Mrs. W.J. Dickey, Topsy McCarty, Jack's sister, and Ben Dickey. And they're on the original wooden bridge there. These were all local people. The McCartys were the son and daughter of Florence or Frank McCarty, who was the first mayor of Revelstoke. And the Dickeys were an early family whose original house was right where we are now on the post office location. This photograph was taken in 1920. You can see several people on the bridge there, including several girls in white. This was in July of 1920. There had been a boating accident on the river, just a little bit south of the bridge site. There's a wing dam that was a sort of a stone wing dam that was built, and there was a group of 4 young people, a man named Walter Nelson, who was 20 years old, and 3 girls between the ages of 14 and 20 who were out on a boat ride. And the boat sort of, I think, hit the edge of the wing dam and overturned, and all 4 of them were drowned. So this is actually a memorial service for the people who drowned. They threw a wreath into the water, and then they went farther down on Front Street and had a ceremony and actually planted a little memorial plaque at the time. So anyway, there several photographs still exist of that original bridge. And it was a little higher in the middle to allow for steamer traffic, steamboats to go underneath. It's a photograph from about probably about 1912 or so, and you can see the wooden bridge there, and even farther the railway bridge. This angled street, just for a little aside here, that was called Government Road, and it angled from the little angle that you can still see where the Lordco Auto Parts is, and the Terra Firma Kitchen. There's that little angle on the street that used to angle all the way through to Third Street, bisecting the school property. It was just a little shorter route from the original buildings, business buildings on Front Street up to the railway station, and that was removed in the 1970s. A little aside there. During World War I, there was bridge guards set on all of the bridges on the railway main line. And so these are photographs of the guards on the CPR bridge during World War I. And you can see the wooden bridge at the left there. So we move on to our current bridge. There was even though this original bridge was just over a little bit over 10 years old, it was already starting to get a lot of wear, and they felt it wasn't because they were starting to build highways in the area. There was a highway that opened between Revelstoke and Sicamous in 1922, and they felt that they needed a better bridge in place for what they anticipated would be increased traffic. So there was an article from February 16th, 1922, talking about public works projects in the district. These would be provincial public works. Said probably the largest piece of work contemplated by the provincial government for the Revelstoke district this year is to work on the new traffic bridge over the Columbia River. The government engineers have now finished boring test holes in the bed of the Columbia River to locate a bed for the cement piers for the bridge, and find it quite feasible to put in permanent work. They are now estimating the cost of the various sites, and as soon as a decision is arrived at, which should be very shortly, work will be started on the piers until stopped by the high water. It will be of concrete piers and steel superstructure. And then in July, they noted that Mr. Leamy of Victoria was appointed the government resident supervising engineer for the new traffic bridge. And he'd arrived in the city and was bringing his family to live here for the project. So the contract for both the substructure and superstructure has been let to A. McDonnell and Company, with Major K. Alexander in charge. The work will be commenced at once as soon as machinery and material arrive on the ground. So construction started in the summer of 1922. McDonnell was the major contractor for the West Road between Revelstoke and Sicamous, and K. Alexander was also the supervisor on that project as well. And K. Falls, just west of Enchanted Forest, is named after K. Alexander. So was given a copy of the bridge contract by Granger Wilson, who for years was the ministry bridge manager for the Ministry of Highways. Unfortunately, he recently passed away, but just a few weeks before he passed, he sent me lots of information on the bridge, which I really appreciated. So I'm kind of remembering him today as I'm giving this talk. But the contract itself was, and this was kind of boilerplate. This was government contracts, all had this clause in them. One clause 41 was reference to British-born subjects. In the employment of any workman, the contractor shall, in the carrying out of this contract, give preference to natural-born British subjects. And then the next clause, 42, was called Asiatics. And it said the contractor shall not, directly or indirectly, employ any Asiatic upon, about, or in connection with the works. And in the event of his so doing, the minister may declare forfeited to his majesty all monies due or to accrue due the contractor. So they could not hire even in an auxiliary position, anybody from Asia. So nobody from China, Japan, um, India specifically. Those were the countries that mostly had people here, laborers in the country. But government contracts forbid any use of any workers from Asia, and made it clear that if they violated that, they would lose the contract and lose all monies that were accrued to them. So it was very harsh terms, made it very clear that that was not even to be considered. So of course, doing a project like that, I mentioned with the first bridge, there were no fatalities. Unfortunately, there were two fatalities and several few accidents with this one. On Sunday, July 15th, 1923, at midnight, at the change of the shift, two workmen, Leslie Lucas and W.S. Shoston, were being brought to shore by the cable trolley from the piers that were being constructed in midstream. The trolley had reached the shore pier when the cable trolley became detached, throwing the two men among the piling into the raging torrent. Shoston managed to secure a hold on one of the piles on coming to the surface and climbed to a cross brace, from which position he was rescued by his fellow workmen. Lucas was not seen again after the accident. Although a search party hunted for the body from the time of the accident, it was not found at that time. He was 22 years old and left a father at Boissevain, Manitoba, and a brother at Munson, Alberta. His body was finally found on August 23rd near Arrowhead. The burial took place at Revelstoke Cemetery, and he is in the listing, but I'm not sure whether there's still a marker on his grave. I'll have to go and check that at some point. The coroner's jury was held after the recovery of the body. It was recommended that the contractors employ a watchman night and day, whose duties it is to carefully examine cables and trolleys each time before an employee is transported in the carrier. I'm not sure whether they implemented that or not, but that was the jury recommendation. And then we saw this photograph just a minute ago of Jack McCarty and others. And unfortunately, Jack McCarty was also employed on the bridge construction, and he died on August 9th, 1923. So really just a few weeks after the first fatality. He was working on the second pier construction from the North Shore. The two-bell warning that the bucket was being raised had been given, but seemingly McCarty did not hear it and was knocked from the staging into the raging torrent. Witnesses said he tried to get back to the pier, but the current was too strong and he was swept down. They tried to reach a pier of the old traffic bridge, but was swept away past that as well. The provincial constable and another man were trying to throw planks to him, but the tremendous force of water drove them out of his reach. He was last seen several hundred yards below the old bridge, where he disappeared. And he was born in Revelstoke on January 23rd, 1899, the son of Florence McCarty, the first mayor of Revelstoke, and his wife, Mary Gorman McCarty. He was recently married. He'd married Annie Cashado, also of Revelstoke, on March 5th, 1919, and they had a baby daughter named Mary. His father had passed away in 1920, but his mother was still alive. His body was found on the banks of the Columbia, 8 miles south, on September 11th of 1923. The funeral took place from Howson's undertaking parlor to the Roman Catholic cemetery, where he was laid to rest, with Father Mackenzie officiating. And an inquest was held before Coroner Briggs, but there were no recommendations that were printed in the newspaper. So I'm not sure if anything came of that inquest. There was a note in the newspaper, January 4th, 1924, that the foundation of the bridge was complete. It said, after over a year of difficult and dangerous work, the contractors on Tuesday finished the foundation for the new traffic bridge over the Columbia River. The erection of the steel for the superstructure will be pushed to completion as rapidly as possible, so as to ensure the opening of the bridge for traffic before the high water sets in the spring. And that same issue, there was also a note of accidents at the bridge. There are two separate accidents when workmen fell from the upper works to the ice below, sustaining severe shocks and bruises. On Sunday, January 6th, E.R. Semple fell from the platform and had a couple of ribs broken and suffered several severe bruises. And then the next day, Monday, January 7th, William Morris took a fall, sustaining a slight concussion of the brain and many painful bruises. And they were both recovering in the hospital. On February 27th, 1924, there was a very long article in the paper. It took several columns, and they gave a very detailed description of the building of the bridge. And of course, the newspapers of the day, they had to get a bit flowery. So this is how they started the article. It said, the Ice Age, the Stone Age, the Bronze Age have passed, and today we live in the Steel Age. In bridge building, the Wooden Age is passing. Stretching its long length across the river lies one of the last monarchs of wooden structures, hoary and white with age, supporting for a few months more its heavy burdens, before being interred in the watery depths of the Columbia. Its successor stands trim and neat alongside, ready to take upon its massive concrete shoulders and steel arms the toiling loads and fast-moving traffic of the future. The steel bridge is built not for a lifetime, but for generations. The concrete piers have become as much a geological formation of the country as the hardest granite to be found in all the land. The steelwork, if kept coated with a weatherproof material, will hold for a decade of centuries. Only an earthquake or some terrible convulsion of nature would reduce it to ruins. The bridge is built to stay. And then the building was described in very great detail. And I will read some of it. Some of it goes a little bit over my head, but it's quite fascinating actually to see what was really involved in the construction. They said that the building of the piers involved two types of piers, those constructed with cofferdams and those made in compressed air cylinders. So the cofferdam is made of road planking, 3 by 12, spiked together 3 planks deep, with the center placed about 2 inches back to form a tongue and groove. These are then placed together and called sheet piling, which is forced into the riverbed in the shape of a hollow square. A second layer of sheet piling is then pounded around the outside of the square, and the space is filled up with clay and mud. Water is then pumped out, and in the bottom of the hollow square, a solid mass of piles is driven right down into the riverbed until each pile is solid. Some of this piling protrudes a few feet for the cement to fasten around, and the cofferdam is filled to the top with solid concrete. When the sheeting is knocked away, the cement remains to form the pier and is thus locked onto piles driven to a depth of 30 feet below the level of the riverbed. The piers are numbered from the city end of the bridge. Numbers 1, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are cofferdam piers, and numbers 2 and 3 are compressed air piers. Piers 4 to 7 proved difficult in driving the sheet piling through the heavy gravel. The gravel would break the piling, and even when completed, 4 times the number of pumps normally used were required to keep the water out. When high water came, the cofferdams were flooded. The trestle piling was washed away, and construction could only be continued by means of an aerial tramway, over which everything had to be carried. The piers 2 and 3 represented the greatest of all difficulties. A.H.W. Crossley, the mechanical engineer in charge, who was from Nelson, stated that he was put in work of this nature on 10 cylinders in the province, and this was the worst of the 10. A long cylinder is forced down into the bed of the river. This steel tube, called a caisson, is 10 feet in diameter, built in 3 sections. It contains an inner tube 4 feet in diameter for the men and materials to be passed through. The remainder is filled up with solid concrete, and its weight forces the caisson down as the material is removed from the riverbed. At the lower end, this 4-foot center widens out cone-shaped to the cutting edge, and it is in there that the men work under air pressure varying from 10 to 50 pounds. At the top of the 4-foot tube is the airlock. This device contains 2 compartments and is used much as a canal lock to connect the high-pressure interior with the normal atmosphere and allow the passing of men and material without interfering with the pressure inside. Pressure is regulated to suit the depth of water that has to be kept out of the caissons. 1 pound of air pressure will keep out 2 feet of water. At sometimes, the men were working under pressure that would be experienced at the bottom of a lake 100 feet deep. And the newspaper quote said, "Imagine working inside an automobile tire carrying 50 pounds, enough to support the weight of the car and passengers." And they went on to describe the process of working in the cylinders. And because it's so long, I won't go into all of the details, but it was quite fascinating to find out exactly the process done of building the bridge. And they actually talked about because of the air pressure of the danger of the bends for the workmen, and said that it's that the people doing that kind of work have died in the past from from the bends. Piers 2 and 3 were over 100 feet long. Mr. Crossley, who was an expert in pneumatic caissons, estimated that the work would take 3 months, but it took 6 months instead. It was very complicated. And he said the last process in the installation of the piers was rip wrapping, dumping about 1,000 cubic yards of rock around the base of each pier. They also described the angle irons and girders as a giant mechano set. The steelwork had been sent in pieces, all carefully numbered and ready to be put together, made in Vancouver by Coughlan's Limited. There were 2 long spans called camelbacks, each 212 feet, and 4 short spans, each 154 feet. The total length of the steel was 1,065 feet. At the west end, there would be a short pile trestle and earth embankment or fill. The roadway was to be about 15 feet, offering 4 feet clearance for 2 cars to pass. On the east side of the bridge was a separate footpath suspended on brackets. Wooden stringers will be bolted to the steel girders, and on these will be placed 2x6 planks set on edge and packed solid to form a wooden surface of 6 inches depth. That on this will be placed 2.5 inches of asphalt. And they said that there were about 45,000 rivets made by the forgers, and they would make the rivets and then flip them up to somebody who was catching them in a tin can. So in the newspaper, they said, if you want to get in some baseball practice, some catching practice, you get on the crew to catch the rivets in the tin cans. They said that the total weight of the bridge was estimated to be 1,500,000 pounds. And then it gave a list of all of the contractors on the bridge. So the contractors for the foundation and the erection of the steel were Grant Smith and Company and Macdonnell Limited. And the fabrication of the steel was J. Coghlan and Sons Limited of Vancouver. And the contractor's staff were K. Alexander, in charge for the contractor, E. Marshall and Elmer Armstrong, superintendents, and A.H.W. Crossley, superintendent of the pneumatic sinking, and E. Bickerton, superintendent of the steel erection. And the work was carried out under the direction of Honorable Dr. Sutherland, who was the Minister of Public Works and was a doctor from Revelstoke, was where he got his, he had been one of the doctors in Revelstoke for many years. And then he became a provincial minister and Minister of Public Works. And he had a staff of engineers. There was Montserrat and Prattley from Montreal, who were the consulting engineers and prepared the plans and specifications. P. Phillip was the engineer of Public Works. Thomas Kilpatrick was the provincial bridge engineer. And previous to that, he had been the CPR superintendent at Revelstoke for many years and was well known in town. Was A.L. Carruthers was also provincial bridge engineer, and A.J. Leamy was the resident bridge engineer and direct charge of the work in the field. And there was T. Clark and D. McGregor, who were assistant engineers to Mr. Leamy. And W. Jones of the BC Inspection Bureau was in charge for the government for the steel erection. So a lot of, these were just the contractors and the supervisors. So then a big crew of workers. The total cost for the bridge 100 years ago, $250,000. I haven't converted that into today's currency. I'll have to do that a little later. Some more information I got from Granger Wilson. He said there was a brass cap set on the top of the east end of the bridge abutment cap on the upstream side. Said it's a geodetic benchmark established in 1946. Said stand on it and you are precisely 446.333 meters above sea level. Its elevation was just recently adjusted after recalculation of sea level. They added 0.40 meters. So the bridge finally opened on June 18th, 1924, and the ceremonies were under the auspices of the Doki Lodge, the Dramatic Order Knights of Khorasan, which was part of the Knights of Pythias Lodge. They were very involved in lots of activities in the community. At the time, they were raising money to build a new skating rink for Revelstoke, which was eventually built where Coal River Manor is now. But one of the things they were doing for fundraising for the rink was to have a raffle to see who could cross the bridge first. So they were selling tickets for automobiles and passengers to be the first to cross the bridge. So for several issues of the paper, they had this little banner there, who will cross the bridge first, to advertise their raffle. And the tickets were drawn by Alice Brower, who was the May Queen for that year. And the ticket for the first car was won by J.H. Moore, who was the editor of the Revelstoke Review. So maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe there was some underhanded dealings going on there. I'm not sure. But anyway, the J.H. Moore was won the right to drive his car across first. And then there were two passengers that were drawn, Robert Law and B. Nelson. And then they auctioned off the third seat in the car, and the highest bid went to Honorable Dr. Sutherland, which is very fitting that he got to be in the first car across. And then Mr. Moore was also able to take his wife and son Jeffrey in the car as well, able to fit quite a few people in there. So they actually had a procession of 80 cars who were lined up on Mackenzie Avenue, and then they drove down to the bridge where the official ceremonies took place. They had the Revelstoke Independent Band playing down there. And at the bridge, Mayor O.W. Abrahamson was called upon for the first speech, and Reverend F.C. Mortimer, the rector of St. Peter's Anglican Church, led a dedicatory prayer. And the Honorable Dr. Sutherland spoke, as well as a couple of other people. They had a red, white, and blue ribbons stretched across the entrance to the bridge, and they were cut by the May Queen Alice Brower and her attendants Mary Hume and Marjorie Hamilton. The newspaper said, the three reminding one of the good fairies performing some magic deed for the well-being of the subjects of their kingdom. And after the ribbon was cut, it was the procession of the 80 cars slowly crossed the bridge, making the loop turn on the other side and returning. So there was the bridge open June 18th. And I'm not sure exactly what they did or when they got rid of the old bridge, but this is a photograph where you can see the three bridges. Would have been taken probably the same year that the bridge opened. So in the background there, you can see the 1910 wooden bridge, and there's the 1924 bridge and the railway bridge. So it's pretty striking to see those three together. A couple of photographs of two men sitting on the bridge. Another picture of the CPR bridge, 1949, and the Big Eddy Bridge at left. Of course, this was the only traffic bridge across the Columbia River at Revelstoke until 1961, when the current Trans-Canada Highway Bridge was completed as part of the Rogers Pass Highway for the Trans-Canada Highway project. And the Big Eddy Bridge became part of the Big Bend Highway, which opened in 1940 and followed the bend of the Columbia River north past where Mica Dam is now, took that big bend at Boat Encampment, and then down to Golden. So that was this was really the only way to cross the river at that time. We did an interview with Alan McGinnis several years ago. His family had a sawmill on Front Street, and Mickey Olson was a truck driver. And Alan said Mickey took the lights off the old Columbia River Bridge more than once. And by the time he pulled into the sawmill, the police would be right there waiting for him. So on April 19th of this year, somebody had a Facebook post on Revelstoke Community Facebook page saying, is it true that there's used to be a two-lane bridge? And lots of comments on that. Don Hawker said, two-way bridge with a wooden deck and 6x6 curbs on either side. 2 dump trucks could pass if they folded their mirrors. A few guys totaled their cars, spinning their tires on the wet deck, and jammed their cars into the sides of the bridge. And Karen Schoenfelder said, we were not allowed to stick any limbs of our non-seat belted bodies out of the window as kids because it was so tight. I remember a converted school bus passing us and scraping the side of the car. And John Holmes said, riding a motorcycle across the wooden planks, you did your best to stay on one straight line of boards, or else it threw the bike around a bit if it wandered to the adjacent line. Easier to do the faster you went. When they changed it to the metal deck, I thought, man, if you go down on this, it'll be like skidding on a cheese grater. So the wooden deck was replaced with a steel deck in the 1980s. There was a post by Ed Trenholm, who was a welder in town, said that he was hired by Ralph Falbo from the Ministry of the Highways to install the steel decking. And at that time, they made it into a single lane bridge, installed the lights, and now they've reduced the weight. There's a weight limit on the bridge, and they've recently reduced the speed to 30 kilometers an hour. And there was another recent Facebook post saying, please stay at the 30 kilometers going across the bridge. We want it to last as long as it possibly can. Ownership, there was an article in the Revelstoke Mountaineer on July 5th, 2022, saying that ownership of the almost 100-year-old Big Eddy Bridge, constructed in 1924, was transferred to the city in October 1998 after the declassification of the Big Eddy Road as an arterial road. The ministry maintains structural elements of that bridge and the Illicilloit 4th Street Bridge, and non-structural features are left up to the city, including the bridge deck, railings, and pedestrian walkways. And there was a report by the Ministry of Transportation. They did an inspection in 2022, and it said it referenced bent gusset plates, corrosion on spans 1 to 6 below the deck level, and corroded traffic rails. And at that time, the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure indicated that the findings of the 2022 report would not be immediately addressed through the award of a contract, although a contract may be forthcoming in the future. And an article from last year said that the city didn't have any plans to do any major repair of the bridge, and said that there would be a point where it's no longer viable as a traffic bridge, and it may eventually be a pedestrian bridge, but no decisions have been made on that point. The city engineer said it was designed for horses and buggies and Model A's, and so we're putting 5,800 pound vehicles on it now, with a lot of weight and going over very fast. So they were definitely encouraging people to slow down. There is a speed monitor halfway through that is probably ignored by quite a few people, but certainly encouraging people to follow the weight limits and the speed limits on the bridge. And hopefully it'll last for a little bit longer. And hopefully even beyond that, it could become a pedestrian bridge and stay in place for a while. I'm not sure, why it's a bridge, but people really have a big fondness for it. I think, people's stories of traveling across when it was 2 lanes, and the adventures of that. And I remember going across and being quite terrified, because it was still 2 lane when I came here. And I'm sure a lot of people have their stories about it. But it's been a part of our community for 100 years. Just to end with this photograph of you looking towards the bridge during the COVID lockdowns in 2020. And the view looking over the 3 bridges in 1991. So that's it for the bridge. Just mention that the next talk is on Wednesday, June 26th on steamboats. That will be the last brown bag history talk for the spring, and then we'll adjourn until September. So I'm just going to stop recording here. Thank you for coming.